Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss brief interviews with hideous men. And yes, that's the name of the movie starring Julianne Nicholson, and it's directed by John Krasinski, the guy from The Office. Now, why am I doing John Krasinski's directorial debut? I haven't. Well, first of all, he's got a movie coming out called Imaginary Friends I want to review, and I have done his two Quiet Place films before, and I am going to do the new one when it comes out on June 28th. And I haven't seen these first two movies that he's directed. This and the Hollows I forget what that other movie was called, but it'll come by next time. But I have reviewed A Quiet Place 1 during the Halloween special and part 2 when the sequel came out in May 2021. So I haven't seen this movie before as well as the next one. So, and of course Imaginary Friends, since that's not out yet. So let's get into this movie and we'll see what this is all about. And I apologize for the title of the movie because it's not directed by a female, it's directed by a male. So keep that in mind, folks. And especially from the guy that did The Office, which I have to confess, I've seen a few episodes, but I haven't seen it enough to know what it's all about. Okay, let's dig in. We open with an interview with Subject 14 as a man who doesn't vote in politics whatsoever, and Sarah Quinn, played by Julianne Nicholson, is interviewing men whom she's led to believe are hideous, which is disrespectful in general, as she goes to a party where her boss gives her a break. Excuse me. And we get different interviews like Subject 51, who's played by Corey Stoll, who was in Ant-Man and First Man, as he talks about some woman as he wants to cuss her at her. And the problem I'm having with is this movie is a mess. Well, it's all over the place. While it is professionally filmed, but again, it's a mess of a movie. Sarah walks by Will Arnett trying to get in his girlfriend's apartment as she goes to a party where she sees Ryan, played by the movie's director John Krasinski, as he raises his glass to her. And this felt like a rough draft from Krasinski himself, as I'm led to believe nobody looked through the script to see what needed to be changed, which really annoyed me for the hour and 20 minutes it is. It's a short movie, I will admit. We get to an interview, and we get a couple of guys talking, and we follow them for a minute or two, and the cinematography is lazy, while the shots didn't make me want to watch the film, which is really sad because I like John Krasinski in general. Not in a lover way, but like as an actor. And I don't know about him as a person in general. We'll see how that goes. Ryan plays the piano while Sarah is sitting in the back of the room in a house and goes upstairs as we move on to Sarah grading papers, and Subject 40, who's played by Bobby Cannavale, who was also in Ant-Man, the first two. And the editing is very choppy as they can't help but move their bodies as they shoot two different shots of them moving all over the place, and it was bothering me. And same goes with the scene with Will Arnett and those were scenes that were bothering me throughout, like, pretty much this whole freaking movie. Sarah smooches Ryan up the storm and sleeps with him, and we move on to a guy asking Sarah if she's using a chair, and she briefly overhears their conversation, and I don't care for the conversation, and the writing is so bad for a rough draft. As remember, it took place during, I think, the writer's strike is when this came out. I forget, but and as a directorial debut of John Krasinski, as he'll eventually make better movies like the two Quiet Place films I brought up earlier, as I have hopes for John Krasinski as an actor, writer, and director. I have high hopes for, well, maybe not the highest hopes for Imaginary Friends, but we'll see how that goes. And did not expect him to fail like he did with this movie. Ryan comes to Sarah's apartment, let me rephrase that, and they have to talk as we get to "Do you promise not to overreact to what I'm about to say" sequence. And that felt out of place, and Sarah calls Ryan a fucking coward as she overreacts to the fact that he did something terrible. And she moves on the next day at work at a school of some kind and talks with her boss about marriage and how it changes you, and the way it's told is poorly executed. For some good advice, as I can't follow it, as it fades back to as it fades to black a couple of times, and I thought, what the fuck was the point of the editing choices? And the scene is beyond me. We get back to one interview with after another, and I can't follow any more of what the fuck is happening, as it's making my head spin around like crazy, as it was making me crazy. And at this point, Sarah gets a visitor from Daniel, and he talks about the paper he wrote as he's subject 46, and he's making her completely uncomfortable as she hates what he's written. As I was getting bored, as this movie is a boring film where it moves around without a point whatsoever at one point at a Christmas party. Sarah talks with her boss about how Daniel can be abusive, about getting what he wants, which is a good grade, and I'm very confused about where the fuck it's going at this point in the movie. The interviews are still going while Sarah and Ryan have an argument about how they weren't in love, as Ryan was subject 20. And is this making any sense? Absolutely not. While she interviews him about who he cheated on her with another, how he cheated on, who he cheated on her with another woman while he picked her up as she was hitchhiking. And I can't make sense of any of this, as the movie jumps around from one conversation to another, and it was confusing the shit out of me. Why am I watching this movie at some point? I should have turned it off like I did Screamers, but I'm not pulling that shit off again. And to be brutally honest, I don't like Sarah as a character from start to finish, nor do I care about for any of the other characters, and the climax is pretty much nonsense, as this needed to be rewritten. Just start over and make a better movie, for Christ's sakes. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 2.1 out of 10. This is a professionally made movie, but unfortunately it's a mess of a movie, and I get the impression nobody went through the script to see what needed to be changed, as this felt like a rough draft, which really annoyed me. And this movie is short for an hour and 20 minutes, which is really a really short movie in my mind. The cinematography looked pretty lazy, as the shots didn't make me want to watch the film, which is really sad. While the editing felt very choppy, as the actors can't help but move their bodies in two different shots of them all over the place, which bothered me to death. The writing is bad, as this felt like a rough draft, like I said, from writer-director John Krasinski, as well as Starr, as he'll eventually make better movies like the two Quiet Place films, as this is a solid non-recommendation for this rough draft of a film, and I have hopes for Krasinski as a writer, actor, director, as I'm only doing the ones he directed, as I already did the two Quiet Place films, and I'm not catching up, and let me rephrase that, now I'm catching up for the Imaginary Friends movie, and hopefully it's as good as I have a few weeks, and I have a few weeks till this comes out, so we'll see. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with the Haulers, and until then, this interview is over.